What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about a series that I'm a little bit late to. This came out at the very tail end of 2024, going into the early part of 2025, and honestly, I was busy with so many other things I was covering at the time that I just kind of let it fall behind. But with James Gunn's new DCU really kicking off with Superman recently and Peacemaker Season 2 right around the corner, I figured it was finally time to catch up on Creature Commandos, which is actually written and created by James Gunn. It has the showrunner Dean Lowry behind it and stars people like Indira Varma, Gunn, Alan Tudyk, Zoe Chow, David Harbour, Frank Grillo, and many more. And yeah, this was the show I really was looking forward to checking out. I really enjoyed the look of the show. I've always enjoyed these characters from the comic books, and more than anything, I just didn't want to fall behind on the modern day DCU, because this is one of those shows and one of these pieces of media that James Gunn said was going to be a part of his new continuity. And we're going to talk about how I feel it fits in and how there are moments that feel like it fits in with the past of the DC universe and how I'm confused as to how this fully fits in. But with all that said, let's get into what this show is about first, and then we'll get into my thoughts on it. The show opens up with Amanda Waller, once again played by Viola Davis, who's forming Task Force M, a clandestine squad of literal monsters when her hands are tied with human operatives. She sends them to rescue Princess Alana of Pokolistan from Cersei's extremist Amazonian militia. What unfolds is a mission layered with betrayal, personal drama, and emotional complexity as each member's origins unfold alongside their dangerous assignment. And I'm happy to start this off by saying that I really enjoyed this show, but with that said, I think it took a few episodes for me to get there, and with a show that has 25-minute on average episodes and only 7 episodes, I can genuinely say it took until about the halfway point of the show for me to say I'm really enjoying this. And that's not to say I didn't enjoy the first few episodes, but the show's tone, it definitely takes a little time for you to kind of getting into the humor, getting into the vibe of it all, and some of the musical choices that were left throughout the course of the show were definitely interesting. At times it feels very much like a James Gunn project, but at other times it feels very much like it's leaning into ridiculous humor for the sake of having its own identity, which at times worked, and at other times I don't feel like necessarily 100% worked. But I'm happy to say on an overall, I think Creature Commandos is a really fun time. I'm kind of sad that I'm just now getting to it and that I'm late to the party. I really enjoyed the visuals of this show. That's one thing I want to start this off by praising, is the overall style of the show in terms of its animation is great. There's some great badass moments of action. It very much blends, comic book looking action, but with modern day anime kind of fighting styles at times, which visually was just incredibly enticing. And I've mentioned it here before, but I have one of those sets of lights behind your TV where you have a camera that scans the colors on your TV, and the lights behind the TV are matching what's happening on screen. And this was a beautiful show to watch with those kind of lights, especially since my wife and I watched it all last night as of filming this in the dark. And so all the lights, there was just very vibrant colors and reds and yellows and greens and blues and all these very vibrant colors, especially in action, that very much lent themselves to those lights and made the entire experience very cinematic, a lot of fun to watch, and definitely lent itself to being a very fun, quick, breezy watch when it came down to the action. In terms of story, I think it is pretty thin. In a lot of ways, this is a alternate kind of Suicide Squad story that has a different set of characters that are all monsters, and we're going to get into those individual characters in just a moment. But as a fan of these characters from the comics, it was cool to see them bring them to life here. I think a lot of the characters are incredibly well realized, though I do think that some of them don't really get a whole lot of time to shine, and a couple of those storylines aren't really expanded upon the way I would have liked to have seen them expanded upon. But for the most part, some of the characters were really great to see. And one thing that I was really excited about going into the show, and that I was kind of thinking about as the show was playing out, is that James Gunn mentioned when he first made the announcement of all of these upcoming movies and TV shows, was that he wanted it to be somewhat like Star Wars, in the sense where you have movies and TV shows that are able to kind of jump into certain timelines, not necessarily timelines, but jump in between certain events of certain movies and TV shows and kind of bounce around instead of having the more linear storytelling that Marvel has kind of been doing with their TV shows and movies. And so I kind of like that idea where they can kind of jump into the past or jump into the future, kind of tell us an in-between story. But more than anything, one thing that excited me about all those announcements was the notion that he wants to try to have a lot of the characters from animation make appearance in live action, and vice versa, more often than not having the same actor play that character in live action or in animation. So when I was watching this show, there were certain characters that left me incredibly excited for the idea of possibly seeing them in live action down the line. Now, I mentioned earlier there are moments in this show that had me a little bit confused as for where this show is going to take place in terms of the chronological timeline. Now, if you've been following all the modern day stuff that we've seen in the DC, we now have Superman, which is a new setup of a universe. But in that universe, you have Peacemaker, who makes an appearance in Superman in a quick little cameo. And this new season of Peacemaker is going to take place, I believe, a few months after the events of Superman. This show supposedly takes place within the same universe as Superman, but also features Clayface, who apparently is getting his own movie within this new DCU timeline, and at times references the events of James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, most notably the death of the character of Rick Flag. But this version of the show of Creature Commandos is following Rick Flag Sr., who references the death of his son in the events of The Suicide Squad that James Gunn did. You also have the character of Weasel in this show, and they also reference the events that he was a part of in The Suicide Squad that James Gunn did, but that's supposed to be in the previous continuity. Now, if you've also seen the first season of Peacemaker, then you'll know at the very end that the Justice League, though you don't see all their faces, but the Justice League of the Snyderverse, the old continuity, makes an appearance at the end of that show. And so it does beg the question what the plan is. Some things are trickling over into this new continuity, some things aren't. I don't know if they're going to kind of try to clean some things up with a multiverse explanation, or if their intention is to kind of just hope that you forgot about certain things and just roll over what they felt worked and leave behind what they felt didn't work. I'm not entirely sure, but I can say in general, though, that I did like this show, but it had me scratching my head as to how this fits in to James Gunn's upcoming vision with the use of a character like Clayface, who is dispatched of in this show and is kind of more of a glorified cameo than it is a character that's really integral here, even though Clayface will have his own story moving forward. And, you know, again, those ties to the previous things, it does kind of have me scratching my head and making me wonder, you know, what continuity are we really sitting in? So I just figured I needed to mention that here at some point. With all that said, though, let's get into some of the characters, because I think that was easily one of the best parts of the show and what kind of got me more and more into the show as time went on, because in a lot of ways, like I said, it's a pretty straightforward alternate take on Suicide Squad, where these characters are going to protect this princess, so they think, and find themselves into some trouble. Each episode of the show expands upon a different character. While they're facing what's going on in this story with Princess Alana, they're also at the same time having flashbacks that kind of tie to the events of that episode that expands upon each individual character in each individual episode. Up first, I want to talk about the bride, who's played by Indira Varma, who, like you would assume, and like if you've seen the character, is essentially the Bride of Frankenstein. That is just a DC iteration here. She's created by Victor Frankenstein, who of course made Eric Frankenstein, and we'll get into him in just a little bit. He's played by David Harbour, and she was created to be Eric Frankenstein's wife, but she wants nothing to do with it. And she's just a really cool, badass character. She kind of takes on a leadership role amidst the creatures throughout the course of the show. There's a lot of great moments of humor that come from her, and more than anything, just some really badass moments. And it was cool to see the episode that expanded upon her character, the creation of her, and kind of how certain events unfold with her and Eric Frankenstein that completely turn her away from him. And I like that they, you know, play off of the idea of the classic, you know, Bride of Frankenstein storyline, while also doing something to kind of give her own vibe here. Then you have the character of G.I. Robot, who's played by Sean Gunn, who's a former World War II android who's facing past trauma. And what I really enjoy about this character is the humor around him. He just wants to kill Nazis the entire time. And this is a character that I've mainly just seen in the comic book pages. I don't know if he's been involved in other animated projects I haven't seen. He hasn't been in a live action movie from what I understand. But yeah, you know, it was nice to see him in a show, and his personality was just so funny. I thought Sean Gunn did a great job as the character. I really enjoyed a lot of the humor around him and the way he was just so excited to kill Nazis. His flashback episode and learning more about him, specifically when he gets kind of indoctrinated into a group of white supremacists, I thought was so funny. And the way he just instantly turns on all of them and kills all of them as all the Nazis. Just a really fun character that I wish they had done more with in this series, but a character that they definitely leave more to do with in the future. And so I'm really excited to see what they do with G.I. Robot moving forward. I think that the humor there for that character lends itself to being something really unique that the DC universe could really use in a fun way moving down the line. And as far as keeping up with Sean Gunn performances, you also have Weasel here, who was in the Suicide Squad, though he's not utilized in abundance there, but they actually do some things to kind of make him a more endearing character here, because if you watch the Suicide Squad, and this show references it as well, they mentioned that he killed a bunch of kids, which is why he's part of the Suicide Squad there, and why he's part of the Creature Commandos here, why he's imprisoned in general. And this show in the flashbacks does a lot to recontextualize the actual events that he's accused of, and gave him a lot of heart. While he is this kind of dumb weasel that's running around doing whatever the hell he wants to do for most of the show, there are these moments that make him a very endearing character. And I actually found that his episode was probably the saddest of the bunch in terms of learning more about him from the past, his flashback. The whole element around him murdering the kids, I thought was actually really emotionally strong, and I didn't expect to be so connected to Weasel by the time the show was over. Then you have the character of Nenah, who's played by Zoe Chow, who's an aquatic mutant with a tragic backstory. And yeah, once they get into her episode as well, you have this individual who's born with her lungs on the outside of her body, and her scientist father is able to kind of mix her genes with aquatic animals, which ends up making her into a creature that's very similar to something like the creature from the Black Lagoon, which they do make reference to here in this show as well. And I really thought she was a cool character. She's the sweetest of the bunch. She's not really a monster who's out there to do anything bad. They never really set up a real reason as to why she has been imprisoned, other than the fact that she looks like a monster. But, in a world that has all these kind of, metahumans and monsters and different things like that, I don't really know why she would be imprisoned if she hasn't really done anything huge in terms of a criminal way, the same way that her peers have in this show. But I thought she was a likable character. By the time you get to the end of the show, she definitely becomes a far more charming character. And, it was kind of heartbreaking to see how they handled her character in the latter part of the show. But I think they do some good things with her character, despite the way that they choose to kind of tell her story in the latter half. Then I mentioned you have Frank Grillo playing Rick Flag Sr. here. I really enjoyed the way he played this Rick Flag. I thought it was able to kind of expand upon more of what he might do with the Rick Flag that he has in Superman, though again, that character there was not really utilized a whole lot, but I liked the way he was able to play the character here, and there was some nice fun moments of humor and charm throughout the course of it. Some of the awkward moments between him and the princess, especially when they're getting it on, I thought was really fun. And I enjoyed Rick Flag Sr. I wouldn't say he was like a favorite or standout for me here in the show, but I enjoyed him. And then, like I mentioned, you have Eric Frankenstein here, who's played by David Harbour, and throughout the entirety of the show, he's essentially just coming after the bride because he wants to be with her, and he's delusional to the fact that she wants nothing to do with him, and the fact that she fights against him and fights against being with him kind of almost turns him on more. So there is a funny charm to the character, but he's ultimately kind of annoying in a lot of ways. I think David Harbour does a good job with the character. He is a fun part of the show, but I do feel like ultimately his storyline felt kind of wasted and pointless by the time you get to the end of the season. I'm sure they'll do more with him in season 2 whenever that comes down the line. But I can't say I was necessarily in love with the Eric Frankenstein story, at least not the same way that I really enjoyed the inclusion of the bride throughout the entirety of the season. And then you have Princess Alana in the show, who is the princess that they're protecting, that they learn they shouldn't be protecting later on in the show. I won't say much more about that in case you haven't seen the show. But yeah, she's played by Maria Bakalova, and I think that the voice performance here was a little weird for me. She's definitely going for some sort of Slavic accent, but I just didn't really get the accent she was going for. At times she kind of sounded Southern, at other times she sounded Slavic, at other times she sounded like she was doing something completely made up. And it never really felt like a consistent character throughout the course of the show. And while there are some funny, charming moments with her, like I mentioned earlier, in terms of Rick Flag Sr. and some, moments in terms of kind of setting up who her character could possibly be in the later part, she ultimately just kind of feels like an obstacle, or just kind of like an element to the story that is just there, and less so something that was really developed. And I would say in general, my thoughts on the show would be that there are some side characters and some characters that are even part of the central group of characters that I don't feel like are given an abundance outside of their one episode. Now, one character though that I did really enjoy outside of the bride, and is probably my second favorite character in the whole mix, is the character of Dr. Phosphorus, who's played by Alan Tudyk. Aside scientist who's turned into a radioactive horror after his family is murdered, and then he has his scientific experiment used on him, turning him into this like skeletal radioactive guy who can't touch anything without burning it. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this character. I love the look of the character. Some of the coolest action comes from this character. Some of the best moments of humor in the show come from this character, and Alan Tudyk is just great as this character. This is one of those characters alongside the Bride that I really want to see in live action. I hope that they're able to transfer these characters to live action somewhere down the line. I don't really know where they'll fit in, how they'll choose to use them, but if there's any of the characters that I really want to see in other projects moving forward, it's easily the Bride and Alan Tudyk as Dr. Phosphorus. I really hope they give that to us. But yeah, overall, I would say that Creature Commandos was a good fun time with some cool action moments, some really cool visuals, but a story that feels pretty reminiscent of just any other Suicide Squad-esque story that never really took the characters to the next level. I think the show could have been a lot better had it had slightly longer episodes and maybe just a longer season in general. 7 episodes for me wasn't enough when most of the episodes are all 25 to 28 minutes max. And the show is riddled sometimes with these side plots and side characters and moments of humor that I do feel at time undercuts the overall journey. And it did take a few episodes for me to really feel like I was sinking my teeth into the series. And by the time it came to an end, I actually found myself wanting more, which on the flip side, I guess is a good thing in terms of a creative kind of perspective for them. They know that the audience wants to see more, but who knows when we're going to see these characters again. There hasn't really been an immediate announcement of the sequel series just yet, or the second season, I should say. So I am curious to see what they do, but that's going to be my thoughts on Creature Commandos. Just wanted to catch up on it, talk about it a little bit here on the channel. Overall, a show I did enjoy. I'm looking forward to seeing these characters moving forward. It's a show that I'm a little bit confused as to how it really ties into this new DCU, with it having moments that feels like it does, and other moments that feels like it completely is still connected to what's come before. But James Gunn wrote and created this, so clearly this is part of his upcoming vision. So I am curious to see how it all fits in, but I don't see that clear vision just yet. It still feels like we're juggling both sides, and I'd rather just have a clean slate with a new set of characters that just moves forward, instead of being like we're picking and choosing what we're going to connect to from the past, and you know, also then having other things that are not being followed up at all in the future. So we'll see what they end up doing, but leave some comments down below. How are you guys feeling about Creature Commandos? Did you like the show? Did you not like the show? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.